Hi, I'm Jim Paolino, CEO of Lodestar Software Solutions and the host of Lodestar's Lending Leaders. On this podcast, we bring in thought leaders from across the real estate industry and occasionally outside of it to have conversations that are insightful, interesting, and impactful. Let's get started. Hey everyone, thanks for joining today. We have a great guest, Laura Brandao, president of AFR, author of Say Yes Every Day, on the New Jersey MBA, great industry person and woman with vision. Sorry, there's so many things, Laura. I was trying to rattle them off. I think you can describe yourself a little bit better than me with all of the things you're working on. But, not only are you running a mortgage company successfully, author of a book, podcast host, which we'll get into a little bit. I would love to hear just, what got you into the industry, then what got you to the point to be a media mogul, and, what keeps you going every day.
Well, first off, Jim, thank you so much for having me. It is truly a pleasure. All right, my story, which it's actually in my book, Say Yes Every Day. But my story, of course, I'm like all those other people that accidentally fell into the mortgage industry. My way of getting in is I was a young mom. I married my high school sweetheart. We got married very young, and I got pregnant right away. At that time, we couldn't afford daycare. So the plan was, you go to work, I'll stay home. Well, I was bored out of my mind. I love the time with my son, but I was very, very bored and I needed to do something. So in the evening, I decided, okay, when you come home, you take baby, I'll go to work. I pretty much had two options. One option at that time would be to go work in a mall or a store or something. And the second option was getting on the phone. So I walked into a marketing company at that time and I was given two options. One option, I could have the phone ring and I could answer the phone. And the second option, I could call out to people. And now most people would take the option of having the phone ring. Even at that young age, I did not take that road. I decided I wanted to control my own destiny. And I was put on a mortgage campaign. And at that time, I would call homeowners, while they were eating dinner or while they were playing with their children. And it was Laura Brandao calling them to let them know they could probably benefit from a refinance. And let me just get down some information so that a loan officer can call them back. Well, I was so successful at that. Within 5 years, Jim, I not only was promoted supervisor manager, I was running the marketing company at that time. Oh, wow. And I was all of, at that time, 25 years old, 26 years old by the time I ran the whole company. And at that phase, now I have two children, one about to go to school. And I thought, well, I don't want to work at night anymore. What do I do during the day? And I went to work for a mortgage company. And that pretty much set the stage of the rest of my career.
That's great. And it's, such a good story of coming up from the cold calling, coming from the sales end. I know there's always just so much like serendipity, it seems, in people stumbling into this industry. I know someone who works for a title company who thought they were applying to work at a tile company.
There you go.
Then they wound up in the title insurance industry and going from there. So, getting into the mortgage space then, and now president of American Financial Resources, what keeps you up at night? What is kind of your day-to-day now? Not even getting into the other stuff you're doing outside of mortgage just yet.
Mortgage, our industry is ever changing. I mean, you have to remember, I've been doing it now over 25 years. I've pretty much seen almost everything I thought I would believe, right? I mean, of course, the pandemic was a whole nother layer that we would have never expected to see. And it ever changes, right? You always are looking at what is that next cycle. Right now you've got this inventory concern. Right now, you don't know when the rates are going up, but we know the rates will eventually go up. We know that margins are going down. We know that compression of those margins are going to hit. So I personally am not someone that anything keeps me up at night because I'm confident in the fact that regardless of what cycle's coming next, I've almost seen everything. And even if it's something I'm not I'm confident in the fact that I can lead us through it.
Hmm. Well, maybe keeps you up at night wasn't the right question. Based off all the things you're doing, I'm not sure you sleep. So, um, you mentioned margin compression, right?
Yes.
And prices going down, having to be more competitive, it costing more and more to originate a loan. How do you
Yep.
fight that at AFR?
I am a unique company because we are a specialty lender.
Hmm.
I do not believe that any mid-sized mortgage national company can compete
Hmm.
in a commodity business.
Hmm.
So I will never be the cheapest rate ever on any
Hmm.
rate sheet. Not my intention and will never
Hmm.
be our plan. But what I can do is specialize in unique products and programs that maybe are more labor intensive, that
Hmm.
other companies really have no desire to do because they're churning out the
Hmm.
assembly line. So we decided, a long time ago, and this is going back 2010. 2010, I started AFR Wholesale in June of 2007.
Hmm.
I was employee number one, going back to my cold calling of calling brokers,
Hmm.
and I built it from employee
Hmm.
number one.
That's amazing.
And in 2010, I had to decide, okay, what kind of company do I want to be when we grow up? Because I started in June of '07 during the crash and during the
Hmm.
subprime problems. I only offered one product, FHA down to 500 FICO score. That's
Hmm.
all I offered, one thing. Well, I was able to grow an entire company based on that because so many people were falling by the wayside.
Hmm.
We were laser focused. Well, as a couple years passed, I had to decide, well, that's not going to work
Hmm.
forever. That's certainly not going to work much longer. So, who do I want to be when I grow up? I could go after being a commodity and being price sensitive and worrying about all of that and competing with everyone in
Hmm.
the country, or I could specialize and I could become unique and capturing and owning certain markets. I am one of the fifth largest manufactured home lenders in the country.
Hmm.
And two of the other are not even lenders, they are chattel companies. Okay,
Hmm.
so put me in the top three.
Hmm.
We decided to focus in on that all the way back in '09.
Hmm.
To this day, we are still a leader in that marketplace. So as margins compress, it will absolutely affect more the people that are more of the traditional commodity than it
Hmm.
would your specialty lender.
Hmm. And obviously, something like a purchase market is going to be helpful too in that regard, dealing with manufactured homes, which I guess would be probably more purchase heavy.
Well, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Forever,
Hmm.
I have been about 75% purchase.
Hmm.
Even during 2020 in the refi boom, I've
Hmm.
always been purchase heavy.
Yeah.
So we've never,
Hmm.
honestly, when everyone else booms during the refi boom, we marginally increase
Hmm.
because I am more purchase,
So how do you keep? Yeah.
which helps when the market turns.
Right. So how do you keep that discipline to not go after the next shiny thing when everyone on your team must be saying, interest rates are pretty low, Laura. I think we could get a lot of refinance business right now. Or what about this state? Or what about this relationship?
It's interesting that my team is very mature,
Hmm.
meaning, and I don't mean that in terms of age or in terms of
Hmm.
their thinking. Most of my sales team has been with me over 10 years. That's unheard of.
Hmm. Yeah.
That's not common.
Hmm.
So I'm very, very good at communicating the vision of the company. I
Hmm.
will continually tell them what I'm thinking, where I'm going, and why I'm doing it. And I believe in OKRs, objectives and key results. I
Hmm.
believe in setting the goal of what the vision is and letting everyone know from top to bottom what their job is and how they fit into that equation.
Hmm. That makes a lot of sense, and I'm sure much easier said than done at the end of the
That's
day,
a really
especially with
simplistic
yeah,
way,
with all
right?
the distraction and things happening. But I think this is one thing I always find interesting. If I talk to anyone who's been successful and run a business for 10 plus years, which is very, very hard to do, when you ask about their niche, it is razor focused in what they do.
Yes.
And I think that's really interesting to see, and I think a key part of success. I know you mentioned earlier that I think you're going on about year 2.5, year 3 of your podcast, and you wanted to do that kind of with communicating and being a leader to your team. So, as a fellow podcaster, I would love to hear what got you into that.
Yeah, it's interesting that, back in July of 19 is where I jumped into it. But the reason why I jumped into it was unique. Okay, I realized that at that time, as you are becoming an executive in the mortgage industry, you live in your own bubble. You live in your own world.
Yeah.
You honestly have not a good perspective of outside of the world in which you're in. And when you get to a leadership or executive role, it's even worse. You literally have people agreeing with you most of the time. Very few people honestly challenge you. So in July of 2019, I decided to start a podcast for multiple reasons, but the biggest reason, I needed to be quiet. I needed to listen. And I needed to challenge myself to hear perspectives of people outside of the mortgage industry. And so I actually would listen to TED Talks, would watch videos on YouTube, would read books. And if something touched me, hit me, enjoyed it, I cold called them. I reached out to them on email, not as Laura Brandao, president of AFR, just Laura Brandao. No title, no prestige, no, I'm a stranger. I challenged myself to go after those relationships just on my name without them knowing anything about me. And then I researched them. I took the time to listen and take notes. And then I put them on my podcast, and I could no longer rely on my title or my prestige or my experience in the mortgage industry. And I was thrown into subjects I had no idea about. Jim, it taught me lessons that I never would have thought I would have learned. And some of those connections years later are some of my closest friends because those people, they don't know me as what I've done in the mortgage business. And we've learned and grown together.
That's wonderful. That is definitely different than my own motivations for a podcast, but I can definitely respect, having to reach out as the podcast person and, the title going away once you're on there. And it's definitely for someone who probably has to communicate all the time, becoming the listener can sometimes be a struggle.
Yep. It's actually something I challenge all leaders to do. Take away your title, take away your expertise, go into a subject you know nothing about, and put yourself on the other side. You will gain new appreciation, perspective, and growth. And honestly, confidence.
And why do you think so many people don't do that?
Fear.
Yeah.
Because the longer you are comfortable wearing that label, okay, here's my badge of honor.
Yeah.
The harder it is to walk into a room without it.
I was talking to a fellow podcaster the other day, and he was saying he was trying to get an executive on a show who's head of $1 billion, company in the industry. And the person was just saying, like, my fear is that this will only get 2 listens. Like, that was what his concern was. That was why he didn't want to do it, to your point. And how do you get through that early on, especially running the podcast where, 2.5 years in gains momentum, but how do you get through that beginning part of it?
Well, number one, it's funny. I started off by telling you that I took the option of being an outbound calling person. Okay. Right. Jim, smartest decision I ever made in my life, besides the fact that it brought me into the mortgage industry. Yeah. It taught me skills that to this day I use every day. I know how to use my voice. I know how to get people to feel me and what I am trying to convey to them. Because when you get someone to understand your why and your passion, number one thing, Jim, people don't care generally. I'm saying generally, little asterisk. Generally, people do not care about the other person. They care about themselves. So immediately remember what I did. I took away my title, and I took away my expertise, because what I did there is I took it down a notch. All of a sudden, it's not scary to speak to me. I took myself down. Okay.
Yeah.
I came in and I've already said, I'm gonna come in here. And I made it all about them. I told them how I will spotlight them, and now how I will make sure that they shine, and I will tell them how I will promote it, and I will tell them where others will be able to see them. And I made every single piece of it about them. And I think I've only had one person in all of the years speak to me about how many views or listeners do you have. One person. And just so you know, I still got him. That person was still on my podcast, but only once has someone asked me.
Yeah. I like the idea of kind of taking yourself down a peg and getting titles away from it. There's always times, like you, I started as a company of one at Lodestar 8 years ago. And I'll get on the phone sometimes and people will say, oh, CEO dealing with a big shot. And I always say the same thing. I'm like, I'm the janitor too, but it doesn't look as good on a business card. So
exactly.
Growing your company, how do you go from being that company of one to actually dealing with a leadership team, dealing with people, having to then, maybe you're not the person doing the outbound calls anymore because you have to manage that whole team. This is a self-serving question because it's the point I'm dealing with now, but I would love to hear in your experience, how do you scale?
I have to tell you, that's the hardest part. That is the hardest part of leadership. And I will tell you, Jim, you saw all my different things I'm involved in. A lot of that are women groups, right? And not to be sexist or anything, but women have an extra layer of difficulty with letting things go and empowering others, because we try to we try to I'll use the word mother, we try to hold on, and we try to keep, no, if I do this or I take care of them, everything will be okay. But just like our children, we also have to prepare them to be able to go off on their own. Our teams are the same. It's the same thing. So it is a struggle. I'm certainly not going to say it is easy to take your baby that you were employee number one and start to, hand things off to someone else. And you know that person isn't going to do it exactly the way you would. Jim, they're going to do it exactly the way they would. You properly communicated what needs to be done. You give them the tools that they need to be successful, and you will be there to coach them if something doesn't go the way that you needed it to go. But you need to allow them to do it. You need to be there to support them. And once you realize that, number one, you can never grow unless you give it over to other people that you trust. That's the only way you will continue to do it. But it's a journey. But once you get through that first phase, like that first initial growth spurt where you have to put managers in place and you have to have different leadership, once you get past that initial and you have those layers, it's much easier to scale. It's that initial growth spurt that is the challenge.
I call it corporate puberty.
Yeah, but you're right.
We're right now where you're just, I don't know what to do with these limbs that I didn't have a little while ago. So, and I'm sure you found the same, that there's always that sense of relief when you finally hand off something to someone and they're doing it well, and then you don't have to do it anymore.
That is
and I'm like, oh wait, now I can do a podcast, I can start a book, I can do all of these different things.
That is exactly right.
You mentioned kind of the added layer of being a woman in this industry, and my wife tells me every day to keep in mind being a lady is hard. That's the thing she always tells me. She's like, Jake, what have I told you? Like being a lady is hard. So in an industry that's been called pale, male, and stale, how do you break in? How do you deal with kind of all the challenges that are facing that way? And then kind of on the other side, as you're growing a team, the other end of that of then building people up and advice to other women entering the industry.
So I have a very unique perspective. Okay. Right. I can only speak for myself, can't speak for the whole gender out here. Okay. When I came into the industry again, came in telemarketing, went to work at a mortgage company, became COO. I was COO by 27. Okay. So I was an executive by the time I was 27. And then I came to AFR in my early 30s and I was handed here, grow this, from employee number one. So my career moved very quickly, so the reason why I'm saying that is I literally didn't have time to think, am I a woman? Is that a man? Is that man doing something different? Because I was so focused and I was so on a mission to, it wasn't about collecting titles and it wasn't about trying to get up the corporate ladder. I'm someone that's very mission based. Give me a goal of, I want to be, a top 4 FHA wholesale lender by this year. I accomplished that. I had that goal. I accomplished that. So it was always, okay, team, hold my hand. We're forging forward and we're doing this. Okay. So for all those years, from the time I was in my early 20s to 2018, I had no idea that there was even something different about being a woman. Why? Because I was so focused in my box. But in 2018, that word margin compression comes back again. In 2018, it was literally the first time I ever left my office. Swear to God, I was not on social media. I never went to conferences. I was the person at the desk doing work, managing, leading. And then I got outside of those walls and I saw what you just said. And someone asked me to moderate a panel. First time in Irvine, California in 18. And I got up on that stage and afterwards I had a line of women waiting to speak to me. I didn't know why. And I'm like, ladies, how can I help you? They said, Laura, you're the first woman executive we've ever seen on a stage in our entire careers. How do you get out there more and pave a way for us? It was the first time I even knew there was something I needed to pave. I didn't even realize because I just was living in that perspective, right? That box, my world. But at that moment, something clicked. And I said, if I have a voice that others are willing to listen to, I'm going to pave the way. And that was one of the reasons why you see me now heading up lots of initiatives, because I'm going to make a difference in this industry and leave it better than how I came, because there's a lot of women that did not have opportunities such as myself. And we're going to show the industry how wonderful they are.
Well, that's absolutely wonderful. And I think there's so much to be said for kind of people seeing that example. And it seemed from what you were saying is you always pictured yourself as that person, right? In your head of, oh, well, it's going to be me, obviously, so it doesn't matter. But, not everyone has that level of, let's call it confidence, right? At the end of the day. So I think the idea of seeing someone ahead of you and doing that, I think makes so much sense. And I love that you're coming to that, at a point in your career where you have kind of the traditional industry bona fides of, as well of, I'm president of this company, I'm doing this, I'm doing these things. Everyone see me. I want to talk about it now.
That's right.
And I think a lot of people try to do the opposite sometimes. And it can be a little more challenging.
Meaning that they try to go out before they've actually accomplished the...
Yeah, it's kind of a me in the industry, opposed to, and probably less women do that anyway. I think that's probably more of a male characteristic.
Yeah, women struggle with that. That is a really tough thing for women to put them, call it vulnerable.
Right.
Women have a problem being vulnerable to putting themselves out there because they have a fear that others will judge them. They will judge how they look. They will judge how they sound. They will judge how they do their work. They will be judged. Luckily, I'm at the point in my career This is what you've got. Take it or leave it.
I also have a feeling from your cold calling days, you've been told no about 100,000 times.
And guess what? I survived.
Yeah.
I
And if it's New
survived.
Jersey too, you probably learned a few new swear words in the process.
Probably.
So, in putting yourself out there and doing that, what types of things do you want to convey to women who've been in the industry for a while or just entering the industry?
So, number one thing is to be themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that I found is that women try, and I'm not even going to loop women into it because I think everyone does this when you start in your career. Okay, if you're starting any career, I think everyone emulates who they see as successful. So people go through the social media or they see who's up on the stage or who's in the magazines and they say, okay, I'm going to be just like XYZ.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be like XYZ.
Yeah.
You can certainly take lessons. You certainly can take a listen to their style or their approach or different things. But take all that information and incorporate it into yourself. Because when you share who you are, combined with keeping a fresh perspective, staying open, and putting yourself out there into opportunities that maybe you have been afraid of in the past, you will shine. Don't be afraid to be yourself. That is absolutely the most important thing because I think it takes us like 15 years to all of a sudden start being ourselves. Don't do that. Right from the beginning, be yourself.
I think that's so important too, especially when something like a podcast. I was having a conversation the other day of be yourself on the podcast because if nothing else, you are going to enjoy doing it more, right? And if you're able to be yourself in all of these different facets, it's going to feel a little bit less like work at the end of the day. Hopefully.
You know, it's funny, Jim. I was having a conversation with a very seasoned mortgage professional yesterday, and he said to me, I see you on social media and you look so comfortable. How do I get to be that? I said, well, probably you're trying to think of who you should be.
Yeah.
Let me give you a clue. Just be you and you'll be comfortable.
I would say it definitely takes a little time to get used to the recording and the speaking and all those aspects of it. But I think you just have to find the version that works for you. So I can definitely see that. So talking about all the things you've done in the industry, the podcast, how does that tie into the book? How does that tie into Say Yes Every Day?
So going back to that 2018, very first. Okay. What happened that day, everything in my life changed. That day was literally a pivotal day in my life that everything changed. When those women came up to me and something clicked in my brain, I all of a sudden had a new mission to accomplish. And I started getting outside of being in my office all the time. I started opening myself up. Just so you know, Jim, I was not on social media until that day. Ghost. I was nowhere. So I decided to put myself out of my comfort zone every single day by saying yes to just being open to things. It doesn't mean I agree to do everything. It means I'm saying yes to the day. Well, I took it to the point that I wanted to hold myself accountable. And in July of 19, the same time as I started the podcast, I blog every single day saying what I said yes to hold myself accountable to the fact. So for over all this time, I've been doing this. And when the pandemic hit, I was like, well, if it saves 2 hours of traffic on the highway of going back and forth to my office, I'm going to take all of this and write a book and put it into the book. And so what Say Yes is being open that every day I'm going to be open to new experiences, but I go into it with no preconceived notions or expectations. Because, Jim, what happens as humans is we think if I do this, then automatically something greater is going to come. And when something greater does not come, you know what we do? We decide, well, that wasn't worth it. How many views are you going to get? like that CEO.
Yeah.
How many views? If you're not going to get me at least 10,000 views, then it's not worth my time. Actually, it is worth my time because I got to meet Jim and I got to have this wonderful conversation. And if one other person that listens to this has a moment that they feel good, I had a great day. And that is what Say Yes Every Day is about.
And just creating those opportunities by being positive and saying yes is enough. Opposed to the result. Yep.
Saying yes is enough.
Well, I like that. I think that's a wonderful note to end on. I would like to thank you for saying yes to my message to come on the podcast. Is there anything else where people can find you or anything you want to mention?
Of course. Well, we mentioned social media, so by all means, please connect to me. LinkedIn, is the big one, Facebook, any of that kind of stuff. I believe that I'm truly blessed in the industry that I've had the ability to serve all these years. And I like to really give back and support other people within the industry. So if anyone is looking for a piece of advice, a connection, any of that, I am happy to do so.
Wonderful. Well, Laura Brandao, thank you again for saying yes. It was a pleasure to have you on the podcast today.
Pleasure was mine, Jim.
Right. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We'd also love to hear from you in our comments or at lendingleaders@lssoftwaresolutions.com. A very special thanks to Elena Gardner and Brian Rieger, who help produce our episodes each week. See you next time.